Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Neurodivergent Connection, formerly known as Inside the Asperger Studios. Sex, communication, sensory needs, and neurodivergence. Today's guest brings all of it into one honest, compassionate conversation. She's the author of a sex therapy workbook for the neurodivergent couples, and she's here to change how we talk about connection. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage, and let's learn more about her. See you there, everyone.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my intuition till it's popping up.
Hello and welcome back to the Neurodivergent Connection, formerly known as Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Cheri. Welcome to the show, Cheri.
Well,
Now,
thank
why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself before we get going?
you. Okay. I am a couple sex therapist and relationship coach. I've been working with couples for a long time, over 20 years, and have more recently done my dissertation on neurodiverse couples to make sure that they are getting the best possible, support they can get.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. What moment or pattern you what moment or pattern you keep seeing made you realize neurodiverse couples need a sex workbook made especially for us?
Well, I did some training to be certified to work with neurodiverse couples and realized that they see a lot of therapists before they actually find one who can help them. So I know that the
Mhm.
professionals are not really speaking language or using tools that are helpful,
Yeah.
and they really do need someone to help bridge the differences between two neurologies that can be very different from one another.
I mean, that's so interesting you said that because I can relate to what you just said because uh several years back I lost my father and I wasn't talking to anybody at all. And my mom could see I was kind of spiraling into a depression. She wouldn't say it, but she would slowly mention, I think you should talk to somebody. And she kept going on, oh, I know this person was seeing this person, this and this, and I kept thinking, why am I going to talk with somebody who doesn't understand me? I want to talk with somebody that gets me, that knows autism. And that's when I did my research into looking for a life coach, what the difference between a life coach and a therapist is, and then looking for one that understands and works with those who are autistic. And that's when I said to my mom, I need to find somebody that understands my story and understands the fact that I'm autistic.
Yeah, and that was a very wise approach to it. Hopefully, when you do that, you find someone that you don't spend a lot of time telling your story to, and then realize that they're not somebody who's going to be able to help.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems is you don't want to sit down with a therapist and keep rehashing your story to them because it just gets tiresome. And especially when you're neurodivergent, you don't want to keep repeating yourself. You want someone who will understand what you're saying, know your own terminology, and instead of going back and forth in this dance, they want to, okay, let's move forward and figure out how we can help.
Yes, exactly. Couldn't have said that better.
Now, before we talk techniques or tools, how do you neurodivergent relationships often experience intimacy differently than what mainstream sex education assumes?
There can be a lot of differences. Some of them are really on the surface, and some of them are deeper. Basically, every characteristic that makes someone different from another can show up in their intimate life. But the easiest to see, the easiest to understand are sensory sensitivities.
Hmm.
If someone has a sensory sensitivity, it can and that can be sensory seeking or avoidant, like either one. And sometimes people can be um, sensitive in some situations and seeking in a different situation. So when you think about how intimacy happens, it can
Hmm.
be. in close contact, there's usually some fluids, there's usually touch, like there can be light issues, there can be I don't know, just everything that could possibly be part is right front and center when it comes to intimacy. So when couples have differences in their what feels good to them, then they really have to bridge those differences in a way that works for both of them. And sometimes that's accommodation by one partner, sometimes that's finding where the overlap is, sometimes that's shelving something or getting a need met in a different way. But it really requires them to think about who each person is and how you find that common ground.
Now, when working with those who are neurodivergent, do you find that one of the biggest problems with sensory is hand holding? Because I know with sensory, a lot of, if you look at those of us who are neurodivergent, I think hand holding is one of the biggest ones.
I honestly don't hear hand holding as often as I hear kissing.
Mm.
Kissing is about proximity, so how
Hmm.
close someone is, and then it's about pressure, and then it's also about bodily fluids.
Hmm.
And so it seems to like converge a whole bunch of different sensory sensitivities that can come into play. I can see where hand holding would be a big one, but it's honestly not one that I hear a lot.
All right. So when people hear the word sex therapy, many feel anxiety, shame, or fear of being judged. How do you design this workbook to feel safe instead of clinical?
I think this is all about differences. I don't think that there are expressions of personal sexuality um, that are wrong or disorders. It's
Hmm.
just about differences, and I think that is one of the big differences in this workbook from other materials that are out there is that this is really there's nothing shaming in this. This is all about let's figure out who each of you are and how you bridge that difference. And that that's what it is. Like we're not looking for how to change either partner. We're looking for how to equip each partner and then bridge those differences.
All right. Now, how do things like sensory sensitivity, communication differences, masking, or burnout show up in the bedroom for neurodiverse couples?
In every way. Um, there's this idea that the best communication is verbal. And verbal is kind of a shorthand for many people. If you can say it and say it clearly, then your partner hopefully will understand. That's not even true of neurotypical couples, but there's a lot of other ways to communicate. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be spoken. So figuring out how you communicate in a way that works for both partners, that's a big piece of this. That can be ahead of time, that can be during, that can be after, that can be that can be verbal, it can be written, it can be hand signals. I think one of my um, workbook activities has the choice of smoke signals for communicating. Like it's just about finding how you're going to communicate that's going to work. So, what was next on your list? Because you gave me four different options.
Let's see. Communication differences, masking, and burnout.
So, masking, um, some of these issues overlap with other populations. So, like masking, when you bring in how people believe they're supposed to behave when they're being intimate, when they're being sexual, you've got masking with almost everyone. Now, it's at different levels and it has a different consequence for different people. So it's certainly not the same across the board. But when you start unraveling the masking, then you're just seeing that widespread. Now, with a neurodivergent couple, you've got masking and whether they're actually showing up as their authentic selves or whether they're showing up as some version that they think their partner wants them to be or a version that they believe they're supposed to be. So that has nothing to do with sexuality. That's like, that'll like take you on a random other path that is not going to lead you to really good sex. So helping them accept who each other is, see each other for who they are, and then again, that bridging of like, okay, this is how you are, this is how you are. How do we have a good sex life together when there's these differences?
Now, I want to go back for a minute. What do your clients come out right straight up and say, I am autistic or I have ADHD, or does it like come up through the discussion?
Well, I work with I work with all couples, and I work with couples who have just gotten married and in their 20s up through couples who are in their 70s and have been together for 40 or 50 years. So it really depends on who I'm talking to.
Hmm.
Anyone about 40 and over, it's unlikely that they're diagnosed, even if they would meet criteria for being diagnosed. So I will ask people about their neurodivergence. I'm much more likely to ask if they have if either of them have any neurodiversities, because that would tell me some of the symptoms or how that shows up rather than the label. And I'm much more concerned about how the individuals in a relationship are different from each other than
Okay.
I am about the label that they carry. Now, if they come in and they tell me that they have a label, that gives me a whole category of things I need to be thinking about to make sure that we're like dealing with that category of ways that shows up. So, yes and no.
All right. Many couples assume something is wrong with them when intimacy feels hard. How does reframing intimacy through a neurodivergent lens change that narrative?
I don't know many couples that haven't at some point hit a roadblock or hit hard times with their intimacy, just across the board. Now, neurodiversity brings some additional challenges, but I know neurotypical couples who have equal or more challenges that they have to work around. So having difficulty in your sex life is not even significant, is not even unusual.
Right.
One of the statistics that I think is it kind of illustrates this is that 80% of couples, of all couples, have some level of desire discrepancy at some point in their relationship.
Hmm.
Well, if 80% of couples are dealing with this basic difference between the two of them, that means that just about every couple I see
Hmm.
is going to hit some problems with intimacy at some point. So if that's a normal thing, then neurodiverse couples, this
Hmm.
is one of the ways that they're normal.
Hmm.
I get normal's not the right word, like everybody else, typical.
Now, let me ask you, what are the differences between desire, arousal, and capacity, especially for autistic and ADHD partners?
Okay. Desire, arousal, and capacity. All right. So desire is wanting. It's the feeling.
Hmm.
Arousal are the changes that happen in the body because of desire. But sometimes you have those same changes in your body that have to do with other processes, not just desire. Men have a much higher concordance. So when they have desire, their body changes, their arousal are much more similar. Women have very low concordance, where they may have high desire, but low arousal, or high arousal and low desire. And so you can't assume that they're similar. Capacity. When you say capacity, are you talking about capacity with energy, with sexuality, with what's the context for capacity?
I think a little bit of both.
Okay. Um, then capacity would be, um, I'm trying to put it specifically into the context of desire and arousal. Um, And I'm trying to think about what the limitations are, would be around those. When I think about capacity, I think about energy, and how much energy you have to put into being sexual. When I think about capacity with desire, I think about the sexual template that you have. The sexual template is, what are the things that you find arousing, and how those how
Mm.
those form for each individual person. And each individual person has their own sexual template. And so what may be on one person's sexual template might not be on another. I am not sure that I answered that part of the question well.
That's all right. Now, I mean, I know one of the hardest things for any neurodivergent person is talking about sex without triggering shutdowns or defensiveness. How does the workbook approach sexual communications differently?
Yeah, there's a whole section about how to communicate in general. This workbook has a lot of psycho ed in terms of what are the tools that are helpful, but then it also goes into how to apply those tools to intimate interactions. Um, how is communication different? The so part of neurodiverse couples is finding communication that works for them.
Hmm.
I have worked with a lot of neurodiverse couples where texting actually works much better for them
Wow.
than in person. And that is the thing that everyone's like, oh, don't text that stuff. You can't read context, you can't read cues. But it gives them a chance to like slow down and think about what they want to say and say it articulately, and they're not feeling that pressure from their partner that they need to like be rapid fire response. And so it's less about a tool that works better for them and more about having them find the ways of communicating that actually work for the two of them. If one partner would prefer to talk and the other would prefer to write, then we've got to find a way to like slow the talking partner down enough and give the other partner enough time to respond.
Mhm.
And if they need to respond, like writing it down and then respond, like this, that's where that matchup of communication comes from.
I mean, that's such an interesting thing. I mean, if every autistic person out there would just use that method in day-to-day life, it would it would kind of replace filtering to the fact that they can see what they're thinking and just look at it and go, "Oh, that's hurtful or harmful or disrespectful to what I'm about to say." And then they can actually go, they can be, in the sense, they can be their own artificial intelligence and say, this is improper to send somebody or say to somebody, let's correct this and have it more meaningful instead of more disrespectful.
I think that communication is so individual, anyways, that being able to put it in writing, send it to your partner, and then later come back and be like, okay, what was it in this that I said that really felt bad to you?
Yeah.
And then get that feedback from your partner, because maybe you would read it and say, I'm just straightforward. I'm just saying what I mean. You go to AI, put it in there. AI is like, this is articulate. You send it to your spouse and you hit one of their trigger points,
Hmm.
or you say something in a way that just feels bad to them. And then that becomes a learning tool to say, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't have to say it that way. Maybe I could say it just as straightforwardly using different words that aren't going to trigger my partner. And then that becomes a learning tool if both partners are open to learning from each other.
Now, when you're dealing with couples, are both both people on the spectrum, or is it like mixed? One is neurotypical and one is neurodivergent.
I have both. Um, although I just have this suspicion that we really do not understand neurodiversity yet. And so I never assume that someone is one thing or another thing. There's a lot of undiagnosed people. There's a lot of very high functioning people who mask really well.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people who I don't know. You have self-diagnosis, you have formal diagnosis, you have um, things that are neurodiverse but don't fit into any criteria, how masking shows up. So I tend to want to find out who my individuals are, what they need, and then how to have a life together that's really satisfying and feels safe and good for each person.
Now, how do you help couples move away from unspoken expectations and towards explicit compassion, consent, especially when needs change day to day?
Yeah, I'm all about pulling those unstated things out. Um, And in sessions, I will definitely, if I hear something that's unstated, I will just check in with that partner and see if that's what they mean. So over time, they learn how to just say the thing and then figure out what to do with it, whether it applies, whether if both of them agree with an unstated expectation, then that's great because they can work under that expectation. It's when those are different that they tend to cause the most challenges. I just think that couples need a much more fluid version of intimacy and one that fits where and who they are in that particular day. Not, I read something the other day and it said implied consent, that marriage was implied consent for the rest of your life. And I was like, that doesn't fit anyone. Who does that serve to just say, okay, you made this agreement here, but it's going to hold for the next 50 years? Uh, it just doesn't work that way.
Now, what does consent look like in long-term neurodiverse relationships where energy, sensory tolerance, and trauma can fluctuate?
This can be a challenge, especially with these unstated expectations. So, one of the things that I think can be really helpful for couples is instead of saying no, offering what you are capable of. So if your partner is interested in having sex and you're not, you might say, all right, I know not today, tomorrow. If I have the capacity, that might be better. Or I don't have the capacity for that, but what if we did some conversation cards or played a game or watched TV together? But that you would offer something that does fit your energy and is focused on connection, but don't just go along with or don't just stay the course just because you think that's what your partner expects. Try to figure out what that lineup is where you both can feel close and connected.
All right. Now, let's dive a little bit into your workbook now. Now, what makes this workbook rather than just a book about sex? How are couples meant to use it together?
This workbook, I really debated whether this is a workbook or a book because the content in it, there's a lot of content, but I ended up with workbook because it has so many, I think it has 35 or 40 activities for
Mhm.
couples to do. So I did call it a workbook, but it walks through um, the tools that are going to be most likely to work for couples where one or both are neurodiverse, and then uses those tools and applies them to the problem of intimacy. So I don't know. It's just chock full of much of the work that I would do with couples in therapy. And then it really walks them through. So I tried to make the instructions clear, not intuitive. There's a lot of checklists so that they can both do the checklist and then compare. And then at the end wraps up with some ideas about where I hope they landed by going through the activity.
All right. Now, is there an exercise in that workbook that surprised even you with how powerful it turned out to be?
Yes. I was surprised at um, one of the things that I have noticed is I think that neurotypical couples can be really lazy. They're lazy in their communication, they're lazy in working out how to live with each other. And I really loved coming up with exercises that threw that out the window and said, all right, how do you communicate on on a day-to-day basis? How do you want to communicate? How do you want your partner to get your attention when you might be hyper focused on something? How do you want your day-to-day to look like? And just went from this approach of like, how do you design a life that truly fits you? And so I think when I started this project, I don't think I saw that as part of this, but I really enjoyed coming up with like, let's just going to start at the beginning and figure out what really is going to work for you.
I mean, that's funny you mentioned that about being lazy, and because I wrote a book and it's waiting to be published. But I mean, one of the most important things is I feel is those who are neurodivergent are very complacent. They're happy with where they're at, and they don't push the boundary because they're scared. They don't want that negative experience, so they stick with where they're at. My book says, hey, listen, it shows you my life, and it says you need to step out of your comfort zones because this is where the story starts. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on everything from social cues to learning about your partner. Because if you're complacent with yourself and you're not willing to learn anything, how are you going to accept change when you have a partner in your life now?
That sounds like a brilliant book. I hope I didn't state it wrong. It's the neurotypical couples who I find to be really lazy. They don't communicate. They don't communicate, they imply, they talk in half sentences, half thoughts, because they assume that their partner is going to hear them and read them correctly. And with the double empathy problem, you have one partner who believes that the other one is supposed to just read most of their cues.
Mhm.
And then you have the neurodiverse partner who's trying to figure out
The
these
cute.
differences, and you just end up with stalemates all over the place.
I mean, I truly believe that's why there are so many divorces is because either neurodiverse or neurotypical, it's that struggle of communication of how am I supposed to figure out what you mean with your half sentences? It's like that old analogy of the wife saying, or husband saying, "How am I supposed to know what I did wrong when you don't tell me?"
Exactly. Now, in terms of stepping outside your comfort zone, one of the things that almost brought me to tears was reading um, the rates of trauma, the rates of victimization
Hmm.
among neurodivergent people. And I mean, it's very easy to understand why someone would be reluctant to step outside their comfort zone when they found a place of safety, or maybe even only near safety.
Yeah.
But you're right. If you really want a different life, you do have to step outside that comfort zone. And that means doing and saying and being in places that are not going to necessarily feel comfortable to begin with. But the trick is to do that incrementally.
Yeah.
Like, don't step from safety into complete unsafety.
Yeah.
Stretch those boundaries.
I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, that's one of the things I put in my book is you don't need to do big things. I mean, I did a huge leap. I took the biggest step of my life and went overseas to school for college for my master's degree. And then I traveled through Europe for 6 weeks on my own with no net, just barely hanging on because I have anticipatory anxiety of my biggest fear that always sat in my head was, I'm gonna miss my plane. And it just got to the point where I just said to myself, I just gotta let myself go. I gotta let go of that fear. I gotta keep moving forward, regardless of what happens. Otherwise, I'd miss out on a lot. And as my mom had put it when I was booking my trip, she's like, don't just book hotel rooms. You need to talk to a travel agent. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything but the four walls of your hotel room.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know that that is just a neurodiverse experience, though. I think that that is that experience of stepping outside your comfort zone, and that is hard for everybody.
Yeah.
But there's huge rewards in doing it, as I'm sure you found.
Yeah. Now, how do you balance structure with flexibility so couples don't feel like they're failing the workbook if something doesn't work for them?
I hope that they heard the invitation at the beginning to take what's helpful and leave behind what's not, because that is another reason why it's a workbook and not a book. Because I feel like there's that pressure in a book to go from cover to cover, and a workbook, it is easier to say, you know what, we're okay with this area, or this is something we do need to delve more into. Let's focus on this first.
Mhm.
So hopefully that's baked into the workbook itself.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about trauma and shame and then repair. Many neurodivergent adults carry sexual shame from being misunderstood, pressured, pathologized. How does your work help couples gently unlearn that?
Yeah, this is challenging because we're really talking about different overlapping mechanisms. And when you throw in some of the other co-occurring things like depression and anxiety and uh,
Hmm.
medical trauma and
Oh yeah.
yeah, the ostracization that can happen just by being left out in social situations. You are talking about a lot of different layers that can come into play in a couple. I think that couples who do this the best think about their life together as co-creating this life that uniquely fits the two of them, so that they create spaces where they really can let down their guard with each other and help each other heal. Um, that is aspirational. That's hard to create. But I think when you go at it from the standpoint of like we want something that's different, we want something that
Yeah.
fits us, then it opens up that space to explore and experiment and find what is really going to help them feel safe.
And it's such a true statement. Now, how do you address those who feel the mismatched desire without framing one partner as too much or the other is not enough?
I think every couple has a high desire and a low desire partner. That can change over time based on physical differences, based on stress, based on lots of other things. So there isn't anything wrong with being the high desire or the low desire partner. And if I took a low desire partner and put them with a different partner, they may be the high desire partner in that relationship. So it's not really about some innate ability or label. It's about where you are at that moment and what you bring to those experiences.
All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about repair after intimacy when it goes sideways, when someone shuts down or disassociates or even feels overwhelmed. And I know that can happen because when you're neurodivergent, your sensories probably go on high alert because you have so many senses when intimacy comes into play.
I think the research is that 10% of um, intimate experiences are going to go sideways in any long-term couple.
Hmm.
I actually think that number is way too low. I think that especially as couples have been together longer, as they're dealing with aging, what they have is things that are just going to change and change from day to day. So it's much more important to figure out ways of saying, not that. How about this? Or I need a break. Or can we pause a moment and adjust this and see if that lets me relax? Um, that needs to be part of sexuality. That needs to be part of how couples work it out. That idea of offering something different, like it's a real repair, and it helps your partner understand that you're not rejecting them or making a statement of how attractive you are to them if you offer something different. It says, I'm in a different space and I need something different in order to be intimate with you. So thinking about that during sex and being like, how about this instead of that? That then lets a couple negotiate in real time without putting a lot of time and energy and words into it. But that says we are going to adapt to each other and where each other is in that one experience. And that doesn't say anything about every other experience. It's really just saying today, this is what would feel good.
All right. Now, what kind of feedback have you received from the couples who have used the workbook?
All of my workbook activities came out of the work that I do with couples. So I took the exercises that worked the best for them.
Mhm.
And some of them have been creative and fun, that they have helped me create over the years. Then making sure that it was as applicable to neurodiverse couples as I could make it. Because sometimes an idea will come from a couple and I will use it with a bunch of different couples, but I wanted it to be the most accessible in this format for
Mhm.
this group. So I have found, you guys are this workbook is the stuff that actually works for couples.
All right. Now, have you seen moments where couples realize, oh, we're not broken, we're just wired differently?
Oh my goodness. I if I can get couples to have that aha moment, that is the opening of a door into a
Hmm.
huge space. And so that's usually the point when they start thinking about the problems differently. They stop saying, oh, I really can't expect you to just understand what I'm thinking. I need to either figure that out for myself first, I need to ask, and then fill in the blank with what they need to do instead of acting from expectations and assumptions.
All right. Now, if a neurodiverse couple is listening right now, feeling stuck, disconnected, or scared to even open this conversation, what would you want them to hear?
The conversation about working on their sex life or what?
Yes, in their sex life.
Um, I would want them to hear that this is uncomfortable for just about everybody. I mean, I've been talking about sex with couples for 20 plus years, and there are still times when I'm like, should I bring that up to my spouse? Is that gonna like hurt his feelings? Is he gonna get all in his head about that? Like, so that fear is is just one of the pieces that you have to go through. But the more practice you have at talking about things, the better you get at it. So, you know, see how much you can get your partner on the same page in little ways so that you feel more confident and say, hey, let's do this workbook together. Let's see what kind of tools and opportunities might be here.
Mhm.
But then also approaching it from like, I want us to be better. I want us to have an extraordinary love. I don't want us to be a cookie cutter couple. Can we look at some stuff and figure out what's actually going to make our lives fantastic? Often a spouse is interested in having a fantastic sex life and relationship in general.
Now, what do you hope this workbook gives couples beyond better sex? Something deeper or more lasting?
Yeah, for me, it's all about connection. Connection is another thing that is very individualized.
Hmm.
Some people need a lot of time together or a lot of touch to feel connected. Other couples need a whole lot less. They need approval or they need their partner to see the best in them. So for me, it's all about how does a couple feel connected so that they can live a fantastic life together.
Yeah. And finally, how can people find out more about your work? What's the best way for couples to start, especially if they're nervous?
The best information is on my therapy practice site, and that's couplescounselingcenter.online. Now, the laws around psychotherapy are really tricky. And so I am licensed in a bunch of states and can do therapy with neurodiverse couples that way. But I also have a coaching business, which is around relationships. And I do some different things in the coaching than I do in the therapy, but I can overlap some of the ideals. And I personally, all the work that I do comes from a standpoint of we're talking about difference. We're not talking about deficit. We're talking about how to bridge those differences. And so that is in every product I have, every course, every program, every therapy session, every workbook. It is part of that.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles. That was Cheri, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Cheri.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not a problem. And I want to remind everyone else, you're not alone. See you in the next one, everybody.